Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Join us right now from the great state of Maryland. Our guest is here today to celebrate her brand new YA title. It is called Invisible Sun. Please welcome to the show, Kim Johnson. Hey, Kim, how are you?
I am doing amazing. My book was just released, so I'm on cloud nine right now.
I'm really excited to have you on. In Invisible Sun, it sounds from what I've read that it's hitting on a number of really important and really timely topics.
Yeah, I wrote this novel during the midst of the pandemic when we were really all isolated. And it's really similar to my first novel, This Is My America, in covering lots of themes about community and gentrification. And for this main story, Andre, who's a 17-year-old Black boy living in Portland, Oregon, and navigating being recently released from juvie for something he didn't do and managing his life in the pandemic. So a lot more themes that I cover in that book. But yeah, I'm really excited for readers to jump in.
These topics, we're hearing a lot about them now, especially about gentrification, of course, the pandemic. We're hearing more and more about kids and adults who are being incarcerated unjustly. But these are issues that have been going on forever. A lot of the audience knows that before I started performing, that I worked within the juvenile justice system. And I know that there were kids who that I was working with who were jailed or put into detention centers, not for things that they committed, but because they were convenient. It's like, we know you did something wrong. You might not have done this wrong, but you did something else wrong, so it evens out the scales.
Yeah, what was really interesting when I was doing the research for my book was I was able to interview two really amazing people one was a juvenile correction officer, and the other was actually the director of the juvenile facility in Portland. And they are two amazing people who are doing major reform in Oregon, in this area, because it has been an issue for many decades, especially when you look at communities where those that are being sent to juvenile detention don't have the similar backgrounds and identities of those that are, being their correction officer. And within a community like Oregon, where there's such strong racial dynamics, there's often this assumption that these kids did do something. And so, I'm someone, when I write my work, I don't try to write my work in sort of black and white, right and wrong ways. There's often clear pictures of it, but for the story with Andre, I have him have interactions with some that are really working towards changing the system, and others that are really that old school model of, I know you did something wrong, and I'm going to catch you, and I'm going to, sort of put a thumb down on you for that. And so that, definitely is a thread throughout the novel.
Yeah. One of the things that drove me out of the human service field, especially with the juvenile justice field, was not so much the kids in detention, because I happen to be working in two very progressive programs that were all about rehabilitation and helping kids get educated and develop skills that could help them return to the communities. But back in the mid-'80s when I was doing this, I really became depressed because I was finding that it didn't matter what we had helped these kids develop when they were in detention. When they got out, the people in their own neighborhoods wanted nothing to do with them. Whether it was the school system, the police department, it was like, nah, they're done. And it's like, this kid's 12, this kid's 14. What do you mean they're done? Well, and it was when I was working in a job helping kids re-socialize into the communities, and the biggest obstacles they faced were the educators, the people that was supposed to be there to support them. That's what got me wicked depressed, and I had to quit.
Yeah, I cover that too in my novel with Andre's experience navigating his teachers. He was someone who was known as that good kid. Mm-hmm. He helped his teachers set up their science, labs for class. He lived with his grandparents in between living with his parents as they were sort of navigating their home life situation. And, for me, in thinking about the title, having it be invisible was really important because it was like for this main character that his whole life really had been erased. Every good thing that he had done, he was sort of looked at. And even within his parents, they were really concerned about, what he was going to be getting into or not getting into. People that he was close with his friends, there was still that sort of question of, who are you now? And I really wanted to highlight that. And, this novel and my last novel, they really are about wrongful cases, wrongful justice cases, really as a way to sort of open the hearts of readers to think about, what should an experience be like, regardless of whether someone is innocent or not. But I really wanted to play on the heartstrings because there are so many situations where someone is innocent or there's other life circumstances. I'm a strong believer in looking at the larger ecosystem of what might cause the drivers for these situations to happen. What's happening in the home, what's happening in the community, what's happening with their sort of stability, or, when we think about now post-pandemic, there are so many young people who are really struggling with their mental health. It really impacted them. And it's important for us to think about what's the community responsibility to care for, young people on up, because they grow into adults. That's the hope, is that, a young person grows into an active member of society, and how are we shaping them to contribute to society? Yeah.
One of the conversations that I've been doing the podcast here for 7 years, and we're getting close to episode number 1800. And yes, amazing. but there are so many conversations that stand out in my mind. And one of the conversations I remember vividly is talked about investing in kids, especially investing in at-risk kids. And you're talking about a kid like Andre, who is teenager, and he was wrongfully convicted. But even if he had committed a crime, it's like those kids that I was working with. They're 16, 17, 18 years old. They're going to be with us for a long time. And we have a choice as to whether or not we're going to make an investment in them to help them gain the skills they're going to need to be part of our community and to really contribute, and for us to want them to be around, or we can just throw money away by putting them behind bars. It doesn't, and putting them behind bars is much more expensive.
It is, it's almost like we are so in a fixed state of thinking about identifying, who will be successful, who will not be successful. Because I've been an educator, or in the field of education, higher education specifically, the past 20 years, a lot of the work that I do in that space is to really try to pull leaders and faculty and teachers and staff to think about young people and how do you help them with a positive growth mindset? How do you actually see them as an asset based versus a deficit based? And I think so much of that is really what we're talking about here is, the brain isn't really fully developed until the age of 25. And so we have so many young people who can develop and grow, and we can be a part of feeding into understanding their talents and skills and what's possible for them, or we can feed them with a negative narrative. And I'm very much interested in feeding into the positive and figuring out what is really going on with a young person? Why are they making the decisions that they make? How can we help steer them? And, I think it's from the simple thing about, sort of the juvenile justice and detention is sort of the more extreme scenario, but we have, young people who are making decisions about whether or not they want to go to college based on interactions they have with a teacher or a counselor, or, what track, when we think about, women in the field of STEM and how early some of those decisions as girls are changed based on who we think that we want to invest in and how we talk about their successes. And so, there are so many, educators and community workers who were, really changing the shift of it, but there's still so much out there that is really trying to constrain the futures of young people.
I think we've touched on some of the things that parents can talk to their kids about when and we always encourage families to co-read, if not sit. I don't know if there's a lot of families who are going to sit down on the couch together and read Invisible Sun aloud to each other, although there will be, and that's really sweet and it's very valuable. But I think it's more likely that they'll co-read a book like this together and then come together to talk about it. You're mentioning helping kids to identify themselves as leaders or look at themselves in different ways, and how can people in education, people like you, help those kids. I believe that all the parents that are listening to us right now, obviously they have a way and a big influence on their own kids and how they grow up and how they see themselves. And I'm hoping that through this podcast we can help those parents help their kids see themselves in really positive ways. But I also know from being a parent of two now adult kids that we have a certain influence on our kids' friends. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the things that we say to our kids and to those kids can make a difference in their lives. And in fact, I think, in some cases, we can be that one single person that our kids' friends hear something positive from that can really change the trajectory of their life. How would you, obviously we're not going to become social workers, but how do you think we as parents can be supportive and talk to our kids about the kids that they're going to school with and helping them see others in really positive lights?
Yeah, I do believe in that community relationship. I grew up with my mom, always embraced our friends, and, coming from very different experiences where I still have friends today that call my mom, because, she was there for them in a lot of different ways and supporting them. And I think that that's a really simple way is, oftentimes we want to protect our kids, as a parent. We want our kid to, have good friends and make sure they're making, certain decisions. And, I do see sometimes there's judgments that parents make about those friends. And, it trickles back to those young people. And so, I think that the way that you talk with your kids, the way that you talk with, especially if you're someone who has a background that maybe has a little bit more access to, understanding about opportunities that they have or scholarships or, whatever the case might be, that they could be a part of really adding, their friends to those kind of conversations. The other thing that I'm very intentional with my kids is when they start to talk about another kid at school kind of going through something, I'm always like, you don't know all that's going on with them. And would you want someone talking about you if you made, certain mistakes or made certain decisions? And I think that's a really important intentional thing, to do, is that, in my story, I have, it's set in the pandemic, and it really deals with a neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And the two neighbors and the families in that neighborhood. And one of those is a foster family. And, I think it is a really good model to I think, explore what are some good things and what are some bad things about how to sort of approach those relationships. But those connections and those friendships really matter in this story. And I think is a good way for parents to think about their connections with people in their own very neighborhood and their kids at school, and helping out, when they can.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of neighborhoods, one of the things you hit on in the novel is gentrification. And that's a word that we're hearing a lot of these days. The the neighborhood that I grew up, which the Boston Globe always referred to in print as the Irish ghetto of Boston, has disappeared. The buildings are still there. They're not in much better shape than they were when I grew up there, and it was considered a ghetto. But now they're going for millions of dollars, and the neighborhood has gone to the point where they don't even use the neighborhood's name anymore. They've renamed it, rebranded it. Can you talk a little bit about gentrification and how that's affecting not only Andre, but families in general?
Yeah. So one of the things that's really fascinating when you look at communities really closely about what's happening to them is when neighborhoods homes are bought out, apartments, whatever the sort of community structure is, they're bought out, but then they don't replace it. And it's sort of a larger thing that really happens with gentrification is you have cities where communities just aren't invested in. You either can't find grocery stores there. When you think about what happens in a cleanup in terms of a city. So, who is sort of cleaning up the streets when something happens in the streets, or graffiti or other kinds of things, or even thinking about the different aspects of policing that occurs in certain communities. And oftentimes you see that it's baked into a community, that they're not actually getting the resources or investments that other neighborhoods have until it's deemed as a viable, thriving opportunity that then is taken up. If you look at different examples, like I'll use Detroit as an example when, it was going through its hard times, and people were buying up properties, and they would become abandoned, and people were, the people who would buy those properties were just sitting on it, waiting for the time for it to invest in. Well, what does it happen to a neighborhood when there are abandoned properties? It doesn't make the neighborhood look strong. It doesn't look like a neighborhood worth investing in. And that's really what's happening a lot in a lot of these communities. In Portland specifically, why I really wanted to write about Northeast Portland is because it's a really unique community. It was created because in the early 1940s, there was sort of like a community that was sort of built up in Portland area. And they were basically like shanty homes. They weren't like established built-in homes. And that was where the sort of lower class, so it was a broad group of people who lived there, but it was a majority of where Black people were allowed to live. And they had a dam that opened up and actually fled that entire community. People died, their homes were taken away, and so they were rerouted into certain neighborhoods. And Northeast Portland was a neighborhood that Black families were allowed to live, and they created community in a city that's majority white. They had schools and teachers and all kinds of supports until it was deemed a place that was more viable for other communities to live in, and those communities were really pushed out. A freeway was built in the middle of that community, which is actually another common thing that happens in communities that end up being either gentrified is that what makes a community thriving then gets sort of split up and broken up. But I think the thing that's really interesting and to be more hopeful is that there's a larger recognition of this happening, and there's some healing that's been occurring in many different cities about how can we reinvest. Something that really filled up my heart is I talk so much about Northeast Portland in my book and what's needed in that particular community to help it become a thriving Black community again. Actually became actualized because, a couple of months ago, the Phil Knight Foundation invested $400 million in an organization to help create a thriving Black community back again, to having it be more community oriented and supports. And it's that kind of thing that I think is exciting and is mostly occurring as people are starting to really talk more about gentrification and its impact in communities.
Yeah. Kim, what is it that drives you as a writer? I mean, you have a career as an educator. I'm assuming you haven't made $1 bazillion as a writer as of yet. It takes a lot of work, and so what is it that what are you most passionate about? Doing the work to create these novels.
Yeah, I have always been very purpose driven in my work and what I do, and feeling like I was called for a bigger purpose to make change. And, for many, many years, it was around education, access to education, because I felt that was the greatest equifier to really make change. And then I began thinking about writing, and that creative spark, and realizing my love as a young person was always around reading and how that helps people create empathy and see themselves in other people's experiences. And so with my career, with my writing career, I've really been interested in writing social justice thrillers. And I love thrillers. So that's one, I love the excitement of sort of like discovery and mystery. And to me, it has my sort of early activist roots of wanting to find the truth. I want to find the truth, justice for all, and putting that in the story. But that's really what drives me, is having young people, especially now, because when I was growing up, there really wasn't a lot of diverse works. And I didn't really see myself in literature. And now we have these, newer generations that, want to gobble up all of these stories. They want to learn about other people from different backgrounds. They also want to see themselves in work. And that's a huge driver for me. It's so fulfilling to know I have a larger national reach versus thinking about my city and my state, the kind of impact that I can do.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I know people are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about you and also find out more about Invisible Sun.
Yeah, so you can find me on all aspects of social media, but easy is my website, kcjohnsonwrites.com, and then my social media on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter are Casey Johnson Writes, and you can pick up my novel probably everywhere that you can get books, along with an audiobook. So that's another great way for maybe some reluctant readers.
And audiobooks are great, because we do, even our kids who are 16 and 17 years old and don't want to be with their parents, they still spend an awful lot of time in our cars going from here to there. Popping on an audiobook is a really fun way to spend those 15, 20-minute drives and then maybe talk about them on the way home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I love that.
Yeah. We had a great time speaking to the author of Invisible Sun, a very powerful YA novel, from our guest, Kim Johnson. Kim, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. It's been so great to talk with you, and I love hearing about your background as well.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast, and will join us for the next exciting episode. If you want to make sure you don't miss a second of the show, please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. And also be sure to visit readingwithyourkids.com and download your copy of the Reading with Your Kids online magazine. It's free. It's available at readingwithyourkids.com. Just click on our blog. Before we go, I want to make sure that I give a big thank you to my team: Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Madison Dairies, Soji Franklin, Monica Rivera Sosa, Ann O'Leary. I want to give a big thank you to my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me, and most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.